So I've landed in Bali. I'm going to take a look at the villa, but I'll save this till the end of the video. So if you want to stick around for that, please do. Otherwise, enjoy the update for today's market action. This week we hit a new all-time high for Bitcoin, $123,000. So we're closing in on the second week, the second highest weekly close in history. But more important than that, closing above the 7-year resistance line. From this point forward, things get more difficult. Each previous bull market has proven this time and time again. There's going to be multiple tests of the emotions, multiple tests of your trading plans, and undoubtedly, we are going to see further corrections along the way. Now, the corrections are going to be the healthy part for this bull market to continue, especially as we run into the end. We're at 32 months up, 138 weeks from the cycle low. And typically these cycles last about 35 to 37 months. That's being around 155 weeks. Hit the like, subscribe to the channel. We got to talk about testing today. The market's basically testing those nerves as we've seen corrections for Bitcoin over the last few days. We've seen corrections on XRP. And I've also got a big one for you on XRP when it comes to the time frames to the cycle peaks for XRP. It's been a pretty reliable indicator. We're also looking at the stock markets, cryptos, altcoins, and commodities, along with our favorite here, the 18-year real estate cycle. So if you haven't already, smash that like, subscribe to the channel, heaps of content to get through. So as I talked about in the intro, we're looking at the end of the cycle moves. Typically, that's essentially what the titles have been about over the last several weeks, of course, but these things happen over a period of time. Just like we talked about in 2022 and 2023, it takes a period of time for the cycle lows to form. So we're not trying to pick the top, or at least that's not what I'm trying to do here, and that's obviously what I'm sharing with you if you are here watching and listening. We're just trying to identify some of the cycle top indicators. That doesn't mean you're trying to sell the exact top, and along the way it might be a good chance to start to sell out. At the moment, it seems like we're just beginning to break through the 7-year resistance, which, in my opinion, I think we've got further to go in terms of price. In terms of time, as I've alluded to, there might only be a few months left, as we talked about in previous videos, Q3, Q4. And along that way, we do see corrections. And the most recent correction we're seeing is only 12% to the low. So as things start to rise faster, they typically come down harder. And provided we get correction tests of the previous highs, then we keep going. It's not until the market basically gets really far away from any significant test of previous resistance levels that we do see these significant corrections. 2021 saw that massive significant correction in May down to the low in June, and then it had that final move to the upside. But in 2017, it was slightly different. We had multiple corrections along the way up to that final blow-off top high, where we only saw very shallow corrections in time, but in price, they were quite significant. So we saw a 30% correction in November. We saw multiple 20 and 30%, even 40% corrections here in August through to September. And then the previous correction of 30% was June. And then you take it to the low, it was essentially 40%. So that was that run up into the 2017 high. So we're no longer in the same sort of market cap in terms of Bitcoin that we were in 2017. So like we've seen with this cycle, it's unlikely, not impossible, but it seems very unlikely that we're going to see 40% corrections along the way. So far, the market has told us that 30% corrections are possible, and we've seen that twice already. So we got the highs to the lows. The first one here was 33%. The rest of the corrections in the early part of the bull market were 20 to 22%. And the most recent 30% correction was this here, 32% from the January high to the April low. So at the moment, the biggest correction has only been 12%. And prior to that in December was 18%. So I think from this point forward, should we see these next price targets hit, the next level is in the mid 130s. So for a number here, around 134, 136, 135,000 US dollars. If we're to get a correction that has been larger than anything on the run up since April, that could be a good place for Bitcoin to digest the move before the next run up. So as an example, if it did get to around 135, The correction of 14% would take us to about the lows here at 115,000, and then to the previous highs would be roughly 20%. So that's about 109, 110,000. From that point, a test of the price is okay. It would be extreme, it would be volatile, but in terms of a close, that would be terrible for the bull market because it would be back underneath the resistance line, which it has taken 7 years to get above. It would be beneath the previous all-time high of around $112,000. It would be basically right around the all-time high in January, and you'd be now starting to form a weaker close for the weekly prices. That's not what we want to see. So tests like wicks are okay, but you'd need to see the closing prices back above any of these previous resistance levels that it's taken so long to break through. Leading into these peaks of bull markets, it is pretty wild to see how these prices can continue higher. And a couple of quick quotes here from the legends of the game, just to remind ourselves of how crazy bull markets can get. And of course, we've now been in one for Bitcoin, at least since the November 2022 low. This one's from Paul Tudor Jones, who is also a Bitcoin enthusiast, we can put it that way. It's just the nature of a rip-roaring bull market. Fundamentals might be good for the first third or maybe the first half of the move, which we've already seen, but the last third of a great bull market is typically a blow-off. Okay, this is from Paul Tudor Jones, PTJ, where the mania runs wild and prices go parabolic. So yeah, we could still see more significant prices. Let's zoom in on Jim Rogers' quote here as well. Whenever there is a bull market, people become hysterical after a few years. Well, we've seen about 2.5 years here for BTC. They think, gosh, what has happened for the past 5 years, and of course Bitcoin's a shorter time frame, is going to go on forever. So I brought up these two because they both represent, in my opinion, what we see towards these blow-off tops for Bitcoin and cryptos. First being this blow-off top, the second being that people forget that moves, these hysterical moves to the upside, don't go on forever. They think they do go on forever because of what they've just seen. And we've seen that with the prices. We've seen it with basically every single altcoin in history. We see it with Bitcoin. Yes, the moves can keep going higher, but it's important not to get caught up in the end stages as well. I think you essentially owe it to yourself to at least take some sort of profits. You don't have to sell out of everything at the exact moment, but take something. And in the case of XRP, as I alluded to in the intro with these time frames, and this is just the time frames from the market, we look at the monthly chart here and take a look at the time frames from each of these swings. It's essentially the energy, the way I like to look at it, is the energy from the lows to the peaks. How long can the market sustain this? This is all the buyers and all the sellers that are interested in trading this particular asset. In the case of XRP, you can see there's a pretty clear history of roughly 12 to 14 months. There's a lot of 12s and 13s that you can see on this chart. These are big, big, big moves. You can see from lows to highs, 1700%, so 17, 18x sort of move there. That was 13 months. Then to the downside, the sellers took control here for 14 months, 13 months up, 12 months down. We'll get to this in just a moment because I think a lot of people misread what I was writing here. And you can see through history, even multiples of this number. 26, of course, is a multiple of 13. So 2 lots here in a multi-year bear market. The bull market up from this very significant low here from January, right into this top of January 2018, 12 months. The move from the low to the low, so this was a bit more of a consolidation period, 13 months. But as you can see from the significant low here in December to that all-time high in 2017 was 25 months. So right dead in the middle of 12.5 months times 2. So basically your 13 months. 12 months here, top to bottom, and then the 24-month period from the high down to the low. Essentially a multi-year bear market again. So where do we find ourselves? Well, right now, XRP is in its 12th month. So from the data, we can see that it does a lot of 13-month moves to the upside. There's also possibilities of 14-month, maybe extending that move. But we're right in the midst of that now. 13 months would take us to August, and for some crazy reason, if it was able to extend to September, which in its history, it has never done it before. However, yes, some people would argue that it's been suppressed now for the last 5 years, going back to this period right here, where the SEC sued XRP. Maybe we are able to extend that extra month into September. So that's why I'm still very focused on watching what happens for July, August, September, basically quarter 3 for XRP, and whether that leads to the end of this really significant move. And of course, people will say it's impossible, it's got to go to $10, $15, and some crazy calls of $100 or $589 XRP. But I think that's really getting away from what the data has actually been showing for a very long time. So this is definitely part of where I'm looking towards potentially taking some profits here. But either way, if the trend keeps going, well, then we've got to keep a little bit in the game. And should we see moves higher and corrections, but the trend doesn't break down, well, then you just got to keep running with the trend. And I don't think there's any need to jump out of positions quickly, because the market will give you some signals. It could even go all the way up, come all the way back down, and if it breaks through a 50%, there's another pretty good signal that things are over. You don't get the top, but you've made a pretty good chunk of profits along the way through that move to the upside. Speaking of upside, the 15-year cycle still looking pretty damn good here. Very much intact. Winner's curse phase. We've got further upside to go here. More and more sentiment is continuing to remain in the greed. As for the S&P 500, it remains in extreme greed. We've seen some pretty significant things here for the S&P 500, closing out at the highest closing weekly price in history, a new all-time high price for the S&P 500. And if we take a look at our cycles, looking at the 5-year cycle, it's pretty much on track here. You can see the consolidation that happened 5 years ago through July into August, and then the market continued to climb higher. It seems like the same sort of things are going on here after a significant move. You've got the white line, S&P 500 ran up, and now it's continuing to consolidate at ever so slightly higher prices. And provided we continue to see the S&P 500 climb higher, generally there's still a little bit left in the tank there for Bitcoin, potentially a lot left in the tank. But what we've seen through history is that Bitcoin tops before the S&P 500. So yes, we still see some further upside here. And in the case of what we've been tracking, potentially a lot further upside, as we can see with the 20-year cycle. So we can turn these two off here and then just take a look at the 20 years. That had a low roughly late quarter 3, early quarter 4, and then continued up for the rest of quarter 4 into that December period. And then for the 20-year, it kept going into 2006, because that's the 20-year cycle. And of course, we go into 2026. The NASDAQ, which tracks a little more closely to Bitcoin, the cycle is still churning out really well here. NASDAQ closed out at a new all-time high weekly price. It hit a new all-time high price. There it is on the daily chart, day after day here, 2 days in a row. And yeah, it's still tracking very closely to the 5-year cycle. That's what this red line is in the background. It shows another significant jump up. I'm cautious of this, but the trend is still up, so there's no reason to be fading this move, even though it is in new all-time high prices. Trend is still up, and it gets going yet again. Now, our daily videos cover many detailed charts, data, indicators, and our forte, the cycle analysis, to help guide us through the investment cycle. So if you're a brand new subscriber to the channel, then I highly encourage you to get our weekly reports on Bitcoin, altcoins, and the economy, including the real estate cycle. They're easy to read in under 5 minutes each, making them extremely digestible for all investor levels. There are 3 reports coming your way starting your week from Tuesday. It'll get you up to speed on how we forecast the markets and how we've been able to profit during uncertain times leading into and out of the cycle peak. It's completely free, so subscribe today using the link in the top of the video description and you'll receive your first report shortly. Yield prices on the 10-year, 4.42%, so pretty close to where the Fed has the interest rates right now at 4.5. The 30-year is still above that level at 5%, and jumping back down to the 2-year, it's at 3.86. So the market is anticipating some sort of interest rate cuts, but it doesn't look like it's going to be anything extreme because the US is getting to a point where they just won't be able to cut to anything significant. Yields are higher for the bonds because the bonds had been dropping. We also saw the unemployment rate drop, so there's no real economic reason for a collapse yet. We also saw the year-over-year inflation continued to rise. Even the core inflation was rising. So cutting rates is probably not something that the Fed can do. And if they do it, once Powell is out next May, and we see a new Fed chairman, and they cut rates at that point, that could spur the market on for even just that final move higher before inflation gets really out of control, bonds drop, and all sorts of craziness goes on, and they're just basically forced to start raising the interest rates. And if they leave it too long, then shit can get really, really bad for the US. So ideally that doesn't happen because we don't want the US basically collapsing because we don't really have another option yet. I don't think China's a great option, but if you believe China is, all the power to you. Okay, so getting back to the US dollar, it has been climbing slightly here, and we have seen just a bit of a pause here for the price. So to me, it looks like we're still going through that churn, even though we broke down. Now we've bounced back up into the trading range of 98 through to about 100. We looked at this when the market broke down into a new 3.5 year low. This is the US dollar. Generally, it has gone on a bit of a pause. So that's what it's done throughout history. 33-month low, it broke down, paused, rallied, came back down, and then it took off. And again here in 2018, broke to a new 3-year low, just a touch over 3 years, paused, rallied, you can see here on the green bar, came back down, and then it took off. This time, however, we've overbalanced in time and price. We've overbalanced in both of these from the range out of the 2008 low, 2009 peak, down to the low here in 2011. So this was the biggest correction in this entire move up. And so far, the US dollar has corrected even further. So it's gone down further in points and in time. So things are beginning to overbalance here on a very, very macro scale. As you can see, it's over years, just like this move is over years. Therefore, any of these moves to the upside, 100, 103, I think will be short-lived before we see further downside. And that could lead to more of the fear and reasons why the US just can't continue to cut any of those interest rates. They need to keep bringing that money into the US. Now, the USDT dominance has also been heading down, which is, of course, part of the model that we're following with my theory is that once we break 3.7%, I should say if we break 3.7%, then things can go quite wild at this stage. Otherwise, this is basically a rotation between Bitcoin and strong altcoins and potentially back again. If the USDT dominance remains between 3.7 and sort of 4.4, 4.5, this would just be that dancing game again like we saw in November and December. Yeah, we got to the peaks of Bitcoin, peaks of altcoins. Altcoins collapsed, Bitcoin held ground, and then it all collapsed back to here around that 6% level. So while it remains in here, it's the dance. If it breaks 3.7, that's where you get the nice big blow-off moves. And in terms of time to get there, if you made it this far in the video, thank you very much. Hit the like and subscribe, and let me know down below if you did. Drop me an emoji with the time, like a clock, all right? Because this, I think, is the part that a lot of people will potentially miss. Just looking at the end of the cycle. So I talked about the months earlier on, looking at possibility of I think I was looking at Q3, that's it for XRP. But for Bitcoin, we have a couple of time frames here. One, late August, early September, that's the 21-week move up from the April low, which is taken from each of the previous cycles. All 3 last cycles here, after a significant correction, ran up pretty hard and fast into that final top. 22 weeks, 20 weeks in the case of 2021, and 21 weeks in the case of 2013. Now, there was one other count that I'm watching. It's 32 weeks from the significant low here from April, which is essentially the same time frame that we saw this cycle. We saw that April low, April 7th low, into the November top in 2013. So if we have this extra time, time essentially to move into this top, then 32 weeks comes out roughly around early December. So of course we saw a top in November 2021, Sometimes we see top around that October through to November period, and December has also been a pretty strong time for tops as well, like we saw in 2017, and the 2013 top was a day off December 1st, basically the 30th of November. So there is a few days coming up, especially if we see the extent of the blow-off moves here, like Paul Tudor Jones talks about with all previous bull markets, what Jim Rogers talks about with the bull markets. And if we see this in the same case, say for Bitcoin, we see these tests to the downside and then no more tests as we run into the highs, that could lead to that parabolic move. Everyone gets way too excited. There is now no more testing of supply. So there's not enough chance for, I guess, any sort of fear to come back in. Extreme greed takes over, and you get this shift of almost everyone jumping from a bear, a light bear, a trans bear, and they trans into a bull. And then you get this big move up into the top. So I'm watching this sort of November, December period, and then we see whether we get this significant correction. If that significant correction comes in and it is larger than anything we've seen already in this bull market, I believe there have been about $30,000. What's this one? 25,000, and this one here was 35,000. If they're longer in time and bigger in price to the downside, that means you've now got an overbalance in time and price to each of these corrections that we've already seen, and that could spell disaster for the bull market, which would then flip it into a bear market. Yes, there's going to be some sort of rally. The rally could be significant, the rally could be small, but once we get an overbalance, it's unlikely that we're going to see much higher prices. Touch of a higher price, sure, but much, much higher prices, you're losing the chances there. So we're not there yet. Total crypto market cap hit a new all-time high this week. The next target I'm looking out for here is $4.1 trillion. So although I do discuss the potential of further corrections down the track, the signs are still leaning towards the markets heading up. We still are waiting on these extensions of the moves. And in the case of the total crypto market cap, we haven't even seen a balance of the move to the upside. So that's where we're sitting, 4.15 trillion. We broke through the 50% extension. Now we're heading towards the 4.15. And so when price gets into price discovery, for other folks, they kind of have a hard time looking for any price targets. If you found that to be an issue, we've got price extensions that GAN used to use. So we have to find the correct price ranges and project them off the, I guess, correct lows. And the way you can do that is to see whether the price range has been working in the past, or look at your swing indicator for significant swing areas, swing lows to swing highs to the next swing low. And in this case, it's looking good. I suspect we will get to this 4.15. If we extend, we get to 4.75 trillion, which of course is even more money into Bitcoin and cryptos. In the case of cryptocurrency, Total 3 says altcoins and stablecoins. It's also broken through a strong level here of 450 billion and now is testing 1 trillion. Potential close here above 1 trillion for the end of the week. We get the consolidation, then it looks like we're heading towards these next highs here between 1.1 and 1.16. The others dominance has not got to this level yet of 8%, but not far off it. So this is your altcoins, excluding the top 10, all of the top 10. This needs to overbalance to get to the next leg up. If we do reach these overbalance and have a correction, so the testing time again, provided you put in a higher low, then we've got the chance to keep heading higher. So we hit the targets, correct. That's going to be a good sign that we probably have further to go. Just means we need a little bit of time to consolidate the moves to the upside. And that leads me to Ethereum, which has had plenty of move to the upside. It's pausing here at around $3,600 at the moment. And the next move to the upside, if this continues to extend, we're looking at the 4,000s. And then the number that you guys know I've been watching, around 4,300, 4,360, which is the 150% move. How, or I guess people look for a why? Well, in the case of Ethereum, you've seen extreme ETF inflows. These have been the biggest levels in history, roughly around double where it was in November and December when ETH first hit $4,000. Now these inflows are 231,000. ETH back here was about 140. I think it was 111,000. This one here about 92,000. So really over double what has come in already. So while this extra excitement for the altcoin space is coming in and all of the narrative shifting towards Ethereum with stable coins and banks getting in on stable coins and governments getting in on stable coins with this whole Genius Act that I think has now been signed in by Trump. Well, you're potentially seeing a front running of the investors, the traders trying to get into ETH on the back of all this news. Now, if that is the case, no one knows for sure because we're doing this in real time. Always hindsight is much easier. But if that is the case, then, and in the case of all of this front running happening, two scenarios, weak and strong. Weak would be a significant correction. That would be more than a test. That would potentially be game over for ETH. I think that's the less likely option, but it's an option nonetheless. But I'm choosing between the two. I give you the two. I'll choose mine. You choose yours. So people are front run. Can this support? Can the price, the market, support all of the previous excitement? If it can, it will remain above support levels. So come back, test those levels. Somewhere around $2,900, $3,000, I think is as far as we probably want to see this thing go for now. If it holds that level, maybe it can hold even higher, but that's kind of the extent. If, and I'm in Bali, you often get a lot of dogs and shit going on here. My friend that I'm staying with has a dog. So anyway, to the downside, if we see these levels break down, consolidation, and if we see price break down, that would be a weakness here. So in terms of the strength, I think the more likely option, we remain up here, we consolidate, and then start to head higher for the remainder of this bull market. And like we've been watching, 165% has now been hit. I was looking around 170%. That's the extent of the move from the low in the swing. And for this cycle, ETH has done 168%. So that's the biggest percentage move that is done in 5 months. This time we've done it in 3 months. So even faster. That's typically what happens towards the peaks of the cycles. Things get faster, and that is what this winner's curse line refers to. You see the gains, and then you start to see the gains pick up even faster. And that is where things get out of control, and that's why the markets can't sustain those moves for very long, comparatively speaking. Comparative means look at the time that we've been to low, there's 34 months. Currently in the 37th month for ETH, it's unlikely that this is going to go on for another 37 months. You're pretty much in that final quarter of the game. So yeah, 165%, consolidate, maybe put in some sort of swing here, keep pushing higher for the end of the stage. So that's the game from now on. Basically, fast moves, severe corrections, severe in terms of sentiment, and it's all a test until we get to those final tops. The final tops potentially for crypto, that is, crypto and Bitcoin, in my opinion, sometime into 2025. I think if we get lucky, it could be into that first quarter of 2026, but I'm not banking on luck. I'm just going to keep going with what the data is suggesting, like what's happened in each of the previous cycles, and each of the previous swings, price and time all looking good. If you made it this far, hit the like, subscribe to the channel, and give me a time watch stop clock emoji down below. Thanks again, guys. Peace out. Bali Villa tour isn't complete without the sound of construction, of course. Let's have a look at Villa 4 here. Beautiful timber doors. Walk right through into our pool area. Beautiful tropical gardens. A few little works getting done yet again. Every time tenants move in and out for the Airbnb, fix up as much as we can. Things get a little bit old here quickly in Bali. Desk, all timber furniture made here in Bali. Beautiful, handmade. The bathroom's terrazzo finish. So this is just one of the bedrooms out of 3. There's a rooftop as well, continuing to improve on that. Here's the master bedroom. Again, all the timber furniture made right here in Bali. Beautiful. And master ensuite here, again, terrazzo finish. Bathtubs, lighting, of course, outdoor lighting that is. And then into the kitchen, dining, living area. Nice little sunken lounge area. Love that timber furniture. And this, again, beautiful handmade dining area and kitchen, everything out ready to go for the next guests. All right, let's take another little tour. There's the upstairs area, and nice little look back over the kitchen, dining, living, and outdoor area.